welcome everybody to this third Zoom meeting, the subject of which is a universal selfless love as a political philosophy and practice. That's universal selfless love. We're not talking about relations between men and women and that kind of eros connection. We're talking about what I'm beginning to see from all of your reports and papers, really a sense of universal love, which is caring, compassion, patience, and all of those qualities that have been, well, I find them registered in the Corinthians, but I found them in Rico's paper. I found them in all of your ideas. So I think we're all on the same page that way. There are 4 topics that we propose in this agenda: defining the politics of love, applying the ethic of love to current global crises, and the universe and unifying power of love in politics, and interpreting selfless love in different societies. The first one, defining the love, is based on the quotation of Friedrich Capra, who asks us to come to grips with the tangible and intangible as equally important. In other words, this is a combination of the scientific with regard to nature and to changing the situation on the planet, and the spiritual, the intangible, the ideas. And the scientist that we've used for this is Mr. Vernadsky, who's credited with now of having defined what is the biosphere. The biosphere is combining 3 spheres that surround the Earth where life can be supported. Vernadsky describes life as dependent on outside solar energy mixed with water and the minerals and inert matter of the Earth. Just quickly, it's very complicated, but it works beautifully. I begin to see that without connection with the solar and the cosmos, we have no life here. The beginning of life, of course, is through photosynthesis. That Vernadsky then describes how we move from the noosphere to from the biosphere to the noosphere. And that's the process as life evolves over the years, the process of cephalization, in other words, the development of the brain and the thinking. And the noosphere is described in metaphysical terms as the sum total of the mind and intelligence that's there surrounding the Earth, which is the combination of all the mind. And there's more powerful mind thoughts and there's less powerful. And the idea here on the love issue is that it's important to be love that governs the mind, because the mind can destroy the planet. As we know, a man can now build the instruments and whatever to destroy the planet. So it's what's thinking and what's controlling the thought that's important. So that's the first item. The second item is applying the ethic of love to current global crises. And there we count on, that's Mr. Vernadsky's view. And that's basically what's going on now and the solutions. So anybody who's going to address that problem. That's really the crises. We can talk about the war. We can talk about the war in the Ukraine. We can talk about the global inflation and all of these issues and how, but those are all little problems that are floating around in our little planet, which is attached really to everything else. And it's to see the bigger picture. So man can obviously destroy the planet, yet have a limited sense of what's going on around them. And it's trying to see that everybody's connected, and that in a diplomacy, that there's a concern for not just moi-même, but for tout le reste. The third item is Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King points out a problem of in fact, the distance between power and love. And what he senses is necessary and what is missing is to bring love would be most powerful if it was linked with power. Without the link, love seems to be an anemic kind of goody-goody issue. It doesn't make any sense in diplomacy. But combined with a sense of power, it can be the ultimate power. And then in the last part, it's what the sense of love is. If you're in a negotiating situation, you bring people together from different, well, like we have here with you guys, bringing people together from different places. So we have two contrasts. We have love via Gandhi and love via, in Japan, via Noriko, where she has talked about the portrayal of love as a suffering old woman, that love really suffers and goes around and is infinitely patient and makes things work.
Thank you. I'm starting. I'm not the best man to start because most of my life I've spent on something which is what we ought to be correcting now. In many ways, what we've seen over the past 30 years particularly has been two things. One, the development of politics dominated by neoliberal economics. And neoliberal economics focuses on two things, individualism and efficiency measured in a very narrow sense, very narrow economic sense. And in many ways, if you talk in terms of bringing love into politics, you will be questioning individualism. You can't be an individualistic and yet believe in love. Nor can you focus simply on efficiency, narrowly measured, and yet focus on love. But there's a second thing, which is much more disturbing, which has been happening, particularly over the past 2 decades, and that is a growing role of hate and fear in politics. I see this in my country, but it's also happening in other countries, where in many ways politics is being driven by divisiveness, of saying, you should be worried about that community, you should be worried about that, etc. The whole focus of politics seems to be on telling people what they should be afraid of, what they should worry. And in the second sense of addressing love is also very important. The third sense, which Barbara more sort of implied, is that here when we speak of love, it should not be just in terms of people for each other. It should also be, if you're looking at sustainability, if you're looking at the biosphere, what love for the broader world that we live in. You know, what this reminded me of was a forest agitation, which took place in the hills in India. This was when the people didn't want deforestation to take place. What they launched was what they called, in Hindi, it was called Chipko Andolan, which I will translate as the embrace movement. And the reason it was called an embrace movement is when the locals wanted to stop the felling of trees, etc., the women would go and hug each tree. And they would stand there hugging each tree so that the people who came to fell them would not do so. In many ways, this was very interesting because it almost expresses a human love for the biosphere in a very physical sort of way. So it seems to me that when we speak of love in politics, what we are doing, what we need to do is to address the two great areas that have stood in the way of our being much more focused on other people, much more focused on what they need, what their rights should be. And in many ways, the word selfless love was used by Barbara. that we should say that our role is to help people who are around us, with us, our neighbors, etc. In India, of course, one of the things which is why I feel sad about what is happening to politics in India is that we really had a great man to shape it, Gandhiji. And Gandhiji very openly used to say that, in our politics, we have to focus on positive impact and kindness. And he believed that anyone can do small things to improve the life of their neighbors. He also believed something else, that yes, we want to change the world, but you can't change the world unless you change yourself. There's a delightful little story of a mother whose son was suffering from diabetes and needed to give up sugar. So she went to Gandhi and said, "Can you please persuade my son to give up sugar?" And Gandhi said, "Okay, I'll persuade him, but bring him to me after 10 days. And she wondered why 10 days, but she obeyed it. And she brought him there after 10 days, and Gandhiji spoke to him, and he gave up sugar. Then she asked Gandhiji, "Why did you delay it by 10 days?" And Gandhiji said, "I could not ask him to give up sugar unless I gave it up myself." Now, that is the part about selflessness, which we ought to, which he stressed. And in many ways, what he reflected was a philosophy of politics which believed in forgiveness. And he used to say that forgiveness is the attribute of people who are strong. And he believed in a gentle approach to political action. And he used, he said that in a gentle way, you can shake the world, is one of the quotations from him. So in many ways, I feel sad that in a country which had the great advantage of a man who really believed in what we will be talking about today, is slipping into this. And I believe it is partly because of the way in which our economy has been managed. So when we speak of bringing sustainability into our discussion, we must recognize that sustainability is not just about humans and nature, it is also humans and each other. We always used to say that there are three dimensions to sustainability: the economic dimension, the ecological dimension, and the ethical or social dimension. And in many ways, these days, there's a lot of discussion on trying to change our economies so that we are more mindful of the biosphere. But we also now want to start thinking in terms of changing our policy and our economic approaches so that we are more mindful of the rights of other people. So let me stop here, and I look forward to listening to what. Incidentally, let me tell you, Barbara, that I read the stuff you sent, and it really is excellent stuff, what you circulated through your emails. Many thanks for that. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to. I think the quotes from Martin Luther King on power and love were very important because they really pointed out, and Martin Luther King, of course, was very much involved in both of these, and in really seeing the extent to which power without love it can be cruel and mindless and so forth, but love without power often just results in nothingness, nothing accomplished, and so forth. And that was he was concerned about. Well, what I discovered as I was looking into this a little bit is that there's a man named Adam Kahane who has written a book on power and love, a theory and practice of social change. And what he does basically is he's involved very much in trying to get different parties together and to essentially get over their differences and move forward in a way that is satisfying to both of them. And basically, what he does is he talks about how power emanates basically from the drive of everything living, and I would go beyond that, but to realize itself, that is self-realization, and increasing intensivity, and the focus is on development, growth, and self-determination. Now, this is very close to I'll point out, I don't know how many of you are already familiar with this, but this is the universal story. I don't know what we lost. I'm just showing the book, The Universe Story. And essentially, different entities, and this extends into the beyond the human, beyond the living, into inanimate, different entities have a drive to kind of realize themselves, to expand, and to so forth. So that's what we mean essentially by power. On the other hand, love is basically works in the opposite direction. Love is the drive towards the unity of the separated. In other words, we've lost ourselves into various forms of power seeking, and so what counters this is love, in the sense of the realization that we're really all part of the same broader entity, and so that we basically need both of these. And in fact, that there's each of these basically has a generative and a degenerative side. And he used particularly gender roles, which I think is an interesting sort of concept. He says that men, are more likely to be, especially when they're younger, to be driven by power seeking, but what that does in the absence of love is it results in their isolation, and essentially not really being able to reach out and to connect with others. And so basically what they need is love in order to come and bring them back onto the center. Love, on the other hand, and he looks at this as women. Now, I don't want to, define these gender categories too strictly, because I think it can apply to either one. But the example he uses is that love, basically, in women more centered on the family and the home and so forth, but often in the process of doing that, deny their own needs, deny their own necessity to grow themselves, to do some of the things that men are busy doing. And so ultimately what he has, and he writes this book basically about the experience in a wide number of different examples, but basically what you have is that that you have the power and the love coming together, and that when you connect the two, you end up by getting something which is much more positive, that it is much more generative than it is degenerative, and so forth and so on. And so there's a whole book written about that, and written about experiences that he has in many different parts of the world. But I think this general concept is a very, very good and important concept that we should be paying attention to. And so that, essentially what I would do, I unfortunately have not read the book yet, because I just learned about it 2 days ago. But it is highly relevant, and it is very much in line with what Martin Luther King talked about. And he was dealing with this, obviously, because if he just preached love, then people sort of lay down and accepted what was imposed on them, blacks and all. So what they needed was to put power and love together in order to derive essentially justice. That's one way that he expresses. So that was the essence of what I was going to talk about, but I think it's important to get that out at the beginning.
But the one comment I have is that Shingu
Yes.
San and Noriko bring together the idea of opposites working together, just like you're talking about power and love working together for a stronger whole. You'll get a scientific explanation of that in Shingo's presentation on entanglement, which is bringing together the power and the love in verbal terms, and Noriko, who talks about art bringing together those two different items. Okay.
So I would be tempted to quote from Anne Hathaway, and this is extracted from her speech when she received the HRC award in 2008, and it's love is a human experience, not a political statement. And this was actually said by Anne Hathaway, and she was talking about the LGBTQ community and all the fight that they had to go through to be somehow accepted, just being accepted. So as I said, I have a little hard time to bring together love and politics, because actually when you look at the past, I mean, and as you too have, I mean, Nathan and also Derek reminded us, a number of philosophers, spiritual leaders, politicians, thinkers have brought up the idea of love and politics. But at the end, to what avail? It doesn't seem to me that we have gone through this beside the intellectual approach of bringing those together. As we said it, the challenge today are incredibly difficult. I mean, whether it's the climate change, the rise of autocrat regimes, and we can see that it's even Italy is taking the path, rise of military conflicts around the world. The displaced people, I mean, I was reading yesterday or the day before in the Courrier International that about 100 million people today are displaced. And the projection, because of climate change, is to bring that number up to 1 billion in 2050. 1 billion people displaced in the world, meaning that 1/6 of our current population has no more home and has been forced to go above. So as at least as one first lady at one standpoint wore in her back, I don't care, do you? And this is somehow, and I think, Nathan, you mentioned the fact that politics is starting to wear on division, and it's really divide them so that we can better reign. I don't think that there is a lot of love shown, and there is no path to it so far if we're staying at this level of high-level issues and problems which seems to be unsolvable. And I'm looking at, I was talking about my little hamlet, I'm looking at my neighbors and myself, I mean, saying, how can I feel part of this world today? And the crisis even is even worse when you look at young people around us stating that they don't see themselves having kids or bringing kids in this world. And I think that's a sign that even love and hope, which is, I mean, kids are the miracle of this world, love and hopes are fading away. So I think that the issue that we're having is because of the enormity of all those problems, because of all the way that people our politicians are oversimplifying all the problems that we're seeing just to claim or pretend that they're in control, brings us to have the feeling, or bring people to have the feeling to be more and more excluded, or less and less part of the game. So is there any solution in this? And Actually, I read some few things from Bell Hooks, and there is one quote which I found extremely interesting and maybe at the art of what we're facing. And this quote is, "Love is profoundly political. It is our deepest revolution, and it will come when we understand this truth." Actually, I just wonder if love isn't the way to somehow bring back to the people the complexity of all the problems that we're facing, and also the solution to it. Love in that sense is just not tolerance about it in another perspective. It's not just accepting the fact that there might be some different perspective on the one given problem. And I'm going to quote Cory Booker, the senator of New Jersey, referring to the, actually, he was quoting the William Penn. He says, tolerance says, I'm just going to stomach your right to be different. That if you disappear from the face of the earth, I'm no better or worse. Love, on the other hand, insists upon active engagement between citizens. Love knows that and is talking about Americans. I would say human beings are as worth and values, and that no matter what their background, no matter what their race or religion or sexual orientation, love recognizes that we need each other and that we are better together than when we are divided. So actually, my thought process was coming to this. We need to bring effective democracy. I don't think that today, to tackle all these problems, to bring a little more care, and I love this last article. It's that is not ethic of love, but ethic of care. That we need to rethink of our democracy and the process the democracy are built on today, to make it a little less vertical and a little more horizontal. And by saying this is, I believe that the democracy, the way to bring back care and love around some of the problems we're tackling, is just by going down to the lowest or smallest level of the community, whether it's the village, the county, or just the citizen. When we look at what's going on in the UK or in France about the refugees, the system is working not because of some governmental agencies. Yes, there are some, but it's mainly due to some citizen association which are taking care of those people, understanding their issues and bringing them to some solutions. Actually, my point here is, can there be love far away from the eye? Can there be any ethic of love or care far from the eyes? And if we're keep going on trying to tackle the problem at the very highest and somehow at the highest level, without imagining that the one size doesn't fit all for all the problem we're having, we're not going to solve any problem. I think love is bringing back the complexity of the problem, and at the same time, it is to make sure that citizens can actually take care of those problems, which means, because love is about trust, love is about listening, which means that at one standpoint, our government and a government needs to start believing, trusting, and listening to the citizen that we are.
Okay, I will have a slightly different approach. And that has to do with the work I've been done the last few months, writing a biography of a man who was one of the leaders in the resistance movement in the Netherlands during the Second World War. And I had to study why he made his choices he made during his whole life, because he was living from 1904 to 1992. And the most surprising thing for me was that during his whole life, he was very consistent in how he approached his fellow human beings and society. He was very consistent in that. And in fact, I could bring it back to two principles. He chose to be the ones who were giving direction to his life in the dilemmas and the choices he had to make during his life. Because he was not only the leader of the resistance movement, one of the leaders of the resistance movement. After the war, he became the president of the first war tribunal in the Netherlands that had to try war criminals. And let me come back to his two principles. First of all, his view, those two principles helped him to establish his view on human relationships and his view on society as a whole. And they were very inseparable in his view. His ideas regarding society originated from his deep love and respect for the democratic system, the rule of law, and their institutions. The way he managed his human relationships reflected his Catholic background and was mainly driven by selfless love in the Christian meaning, God's command, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which transcended for him the personal interest and his relation to the common interest, to the common good. What makes it very interesting that he showed it in his life, practical choices he made. In pre-war, these two principles helped him to remain critical of all kinds of social movements he originally believed in, but which derailed from especially democracy and later collaborated with the Nazis in the Netherlands. His motivation for engaging in the resistance movement during the war was just do it what you have to do, and you need to help your fellow man in crisis. A very simple statement, but I mean, with a lot of personal risks involved, of course. He helped a number of Jewish families to escape, and he organized the resistance movement in the south of the Netherlands. And post-war, as president of the tribunal, he was able to show compassion, irrespective of the loss of so many of his fellow resistance fighters. In line with the rule of law and with a lot of consideration of human nature, he didn't take revenge, but recognized the need of contextualization of the crime, forgiveness, and the rehabilitations of individuals. For me, it was very inspiration because it was not longer an abstract discourse on love, but an inspiration for real-time action. And what for me the most important thing has been is that he combined his personal interest and the interest of the common good. Although he was, of course, not yet that much occupied with nature or the biosphere. Those were unknown concepts in his time of life, but his personal view on his interaction with his fellow human beings, with his society, and with the biosphere were inseparable from his personal interest. And that makes it very interesting if you relate that to love. The love for himself was included in his love for the common good as such, and for nature and society. That was indeed, for me, the greatest inspiration of writing his biography. Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's, first of all, thank you very much for session and with a very relevant topic and also a very complex and challenging one. I probably make a few comments across the items that you proposed on the agenda, because I think one critical issue regards the linkage between the individual level that we are talking about and how we generalize that at the level of society, and how it somehow relate to the value-based sort of perceptions of the world on the competing value sort of systems that we face just now in a very critical manner at the world level. I also think that it goes along the road, of course, to somehow enrich the question and the concept of love in terms of what it relates to in different aspects of life, both at the individual and the societal level. I'm currently reading Francis Fukuyama's latest book on the liberalism and its discontent, which I think also has some bearing on some of the things that we're talking about. And of course, the overall concern that we are seeing just now, the challenge of many of what we regarded as universal values. I recognize, of course, the fact that there are different ways in which the concept of love and the selfless love somehow expresses itself in different societies. But I still think it would be valuable to consider and discuss how can we make sure that there is a universal foundation of values that we can all relate to, in a sense, that we can somehow ease the communication among people and societies. I mean, we are experiencing a period of time that people are somehow retracting into the individual societies and group of communities. But at the same time, we have to realize, considering also the broader worldwide challenges and climate and other issues that face the planet, that we are interlinked. There's no way out. There's no solution at the level of individualism in terms of societies and the nations. That's just a few remarks on my part.
Okay, thank you. What I like to share is a Baha'i perspective on love, but it resonates with so much of what everybody has been saying already in the presentations before. And since I only have 5 minutes, I'll have to go relatively quickly, but I think I'm sharing the text with you, particularly so that we can also look at them later, as you want to go going forward in the discussion. Because the Baha'i concept of love selfless love is very broad. And so, yeah, and they apply to so many things. The first quote I want to share with you comes from Abdul Baha, the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, who was writing more than 100 years ago. But you will see in his definition of love that it covers everything from the love in religion to entropy and the magnetic forces in physics we're only now just discovering. And he wrote, "Know thou of a certainty that love is the secret of God's holy dispensation, the manifestation of the all-merciful, the fountain of spiritual outpourings. Love is heaven's kindly light, the Holy Spirit's eternal breath that vivifieth the human soul. Love is the cause of God's revelation unto man, the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation in the realities of things. Love is the one means that ensureth true felicity, both in this world and in the next. Love is the light that guideth in darkness, the living link that uniteth God with man, that assureth the progress of every illumined soul. Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directeth movements of the spheres in the celestial realm." This reference over 100 years ago seems to be the entropy that physicists are now discovering, the forces of attraction in everything from the atomic level to the cosmic level. Love revealeth with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe. Love is the spirit of life unto the adorned body of mankind, the establisher of true civilization in this mortal world, and the shedder of imperishable glory upon every high-aiming race and nation. So there's the social side of love. So we can see today's problem are largely ascribed to complete absence of such love in so many institutions in today's society. This higher human potential for selfless love, ultimate love for the unknowable essence or absolute reality that we call God, is in fact our true human purpose. When we learn to love the unknown and unknowable, we learn also to love the unknown qualities, potential in ourselves, in others, and in the natural world. This is what unites us with all of humanity and with nature. So here's one practical application of selfless love as expressed by the Baha'i international community. When leaders consider the impact of policies before them, they will need to give thought to what so many might term the human spirit, that essential quality which seeks meaning and aspires to transcendence. These less tangible dimensions of human existence have typically been viewed as confined to the realm of personal belief and lying outside the concern of policymakers and administrators. But experience has shown that progress for all is not attainable if material advancement is divorced from spiritual and ethical advancement. Only by ensuring that material progress is consciously connected to spiritual and social progress can the promise of a better world be fulfilled. The international governing body of the Baha'i Faith, the Universal House of Justice, has recently put this into context when they wrote, "The global challenges now facing humanity are a severe test of its willingness to put aside short-term self-interest and come to terms with this stark spiritual and moral reality. There is but one interconnected human family, and it shares one precious homeland. It is through love for all people, and by subordinating lesser loyalties to the best interests of humankind, that the unity of the world can be realized and the infinite expressions of human diversity find their highest fulfillment. Fostering unity by harmonizing disparate elements and nurturing in every heart a selfless love for humankind is the task of religion. A heart that has embraced love for the whole of humanity will certainly be pained and confronted with the suffering that so many endure because of disunity." This was just written 2 years ago. So, and they quote again Abdul Baha, "Peace must first be established among individuals, until it leadeth in the end to peace among nations. Wherefore strive ye with all your might to create, through the power of the word of God, genuine love, spiritual communion, and durable bonds among individuals." So to start with our individual love, and then it can extend to the higher levels. So love is the only path to peace and sustainability. So I'll stop sharing now. That was a short way to try to share with you, I think, some texts that unite much of what we've been saying from the scientific level to the social level and to the spiritual level, because really love is that force of attraction that we need to bring to all levels in our society. Thank you very much.
You can summarize what you said, Arthur, by the expression "God is love," which is in the New Testament.
Yes. Well, all the religions have been saying the same thing. We've just forgotten about it.
Yeah. And people don't see the practicality of it. Norbert, you're shaking your head. What do you mean? Would you like to say, make a comment?
Oui, je voudrais dire que pour moi, l'amour n'existe pas, c'est simplement le verbe aimer. L'amour, c'est toujours quelque chose d'actif. pas simplement dans les idées. Je suis en train de lire un livre. Voilà.
Zandan. I do not
Alors,
believe, I do not believe in love.
je le vis.
I live it.
It's an action, not a concept. Ce n'est pas parce que je ne suis pas du même avis que mon voisin que je suis ennemi. Accepter la différence de pensée. Et pour moi, aimer, c'est toujours action. Et chaque petite action contribue à l'amour du monde entier. Ma petite action aimer, c'est pour le monde entier, ça devient universel. Voilà, merci.
What I want to talk about love today is one definition of love, which is love is entanglement. So what is entanglement? Then comes a problem, next problem. But entanglement is a term which, physical term, this is in physics, but in particular, quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a kind of physics which was developed about 100 years ago. And the conclusion of quantum mechanics allows two different things get together to become one. So something white and black get together, entangled to become one, which one is either black and white, and neither black nor white. So one thing which is both nature of both black and white, this is entanglement. Such a what Einstein called this kind of conclusion very spooky. Spooky is a word this English word, which is something odd and unacceptable thing, which is spooky. So Einstein did not believe this entanglement, but the Nobel Prize this year was given to 3 researchers who proved experimentally proved the existence of such state, which is two different or rather opposite state of, for instance, this is two opposite state. For instance, and the experiment said, for instance, electron is a elementary particle, one of the elementary particles, but every electron has either upward spinning or downward spinning. Two same electrons, but two opposite natures belong to one electron. So these two states of electron is independently existing in the world. But this is a classical physics, but quantum mechanics predicted the existence of such these two opposite states can be entangled to get to only one species. So these two particles, one and the others, become the same entangled electrons. Okay, and the quite surprising nature of this entangled state is if these entangled two species, two particles these are two but the same thing, two but the same. This is a philosophy. Philosophically, this is a quite a common way of explaining things. For instance, Heraclitus, which is a pre-Socrates philosopher, said everything is one. Everything is one means two different things can be looked as one. But physically, this has been quite odd 100 years ago. Even Einstein denied the existence of such a odd theory. But this year's Nobel Prize was given to who verified experimentally the existence of such thing. Two opposite state of electron can get to become entangled and to become one. So the odd nature of these entangled particles is if these entangled two particles are separated very far away, arbitrarily far away from Paris to Tokyo or something, or much farther, so from the moon and Earth or such different. And if one of these entangled species is stimulated to get back to the original black state and up and down state, down spinning and up spinning, if one is returned to the original state, instantly the other particle becomes the reverse side. So if one is returned to down spinning, the other one, which is far away, is instantly get back to the up spinning. This kind of unbelievable happening has been proved. So this is all about what is entanglement. But my interpretation of this entanglement, which is newly found state, physically newly, but philosophically quite old, can be interpreted as a definition of love. So this is the point I want to stress. The love is, in my definition, love is the entanglement of minds. Two minds, you yourself and other is different person. So the minds are different. But if you start to love, the two minds, in my interpretation, two minds get together to one. So if you totally in love with some person, you and yourself are not two different persons, but one person. One person physically different, but mind of two persons can get together by love, which is equal to entanglement. So I think this is, at least what I wanted to say, I think the listeners understood. So I'll stop here.
No, that's very good. And I think you'll see when we talked earlier about power and love, you put those as the two opposite things in there, to be entangled would make it one.
Entangled, which means when an entanglement is a physical thing, but when you come to the mind is not physical. This is sort of a, what you say, noosphere affairs,
Yeah.
Noosphere.
And that's why understanding the noosphere is rather important.
Yeah, noosphere is about minds, but the physics is in physics. But physical evidence of existence of entanglement can be, in my mind, it is applicable to the interpretation or definition of love, which is my conclusion today.
I would like to expand on Dominique's presentation and his concern about climate change, and he talked about the conditions that exist by 2050, and in terms of the number of people who would be displaced. But he didn't talk about the conditions that will exist by 2100. Those will be conditions under which the human species is likely to not survive. In other words, we're really talking on our current track, we're talking about the extinction of the human species as well as vast amounts of animals and so on. We're talking about going back to an era of like 400 million years ago, when we had a very, very different kind of a planet than we have now and that we're going to have as the rate goes along. I think that it is, this group and every other group that, that is really concerned about, what's happening on this planet has got to get out there and start really, telling people what is happening. It's just, to me, it's unbelievable that people are not responding and doing more. I realize it's problems. Maybe power and love can help to solve those problems, but the consequences, if we don't solve them, are extremely grave. It's the extinction of the Homo sapiens.
I totally agree with you, Dick. The thing is that I wondered at one standpoint, when you look at the situation, if the First Nations organization, social organization, where I wouldn't say a compassion, but at least where people were looking after each other's, were due to the absolute survival mode in which they were, because the environment was extremely complicated. I wondered at one standpoint if we wouldn't go back to that kind of structure when we realize that our environment is starting to really wipe us out. And you're absolutely right. Within 100 years, we might be out of, or 200 years, we might be out of this world just because of what we're doing now or what we're not doing now. That's one thing. The other thing is that I'm always very surprised when you're walking around, and whether it's here in France, in my little hamlet of Cangy, or in the US, in Oberlin, how accurate are individuals upon the problem they're facing in a day-to-day life, whether it's a farmer with the drought or the crops which are not growing the proper way, or if the people just with the war and the fear they have about war. It is also, what surprises me is that gap between their feeling, their perception, and the answer given by the politicians. And I think that when I was saying, let's go back to small, let's make sure that people can somehow cares about what they're having in sight, is maybe the answer, because this is where the feeling of care, the feeling of love can express itself the best way. I'm a little questioning that the high level approach on love and care, even though I recognize that religion can help us going through that path.
I think the different threads of our discussion so far are really pointing us to the key issues with respect to love. Because, as a scientist, I've been working for 50 years saying we're heading for disaster. Limits to Growth 1972 already talked about this. The science has been there. It's been very clear. It's gotten clearer and clearer. Now it's actually happening. It's not just predictions. We're in the middle of it. And still, it's not having an effect on the economic actors that Nitin Desai talked about. Corporations don't express love. They're there for short-term profit, and they totally ignore everything that science and the human heart has been saying for 50 years. So how do we try to bring love into the institutions that we built in society that are no expression of love? On the contrary, they reflect values of greed and selfishness and in the short term and total disregard for the future. So I think that's part of our challenge, is that on the one hand, we have all the humans feeling love, and we recognize the problems, but we're not having an impact on those important actors that have most of the power. And because they corrupt governments, they have political power as well as economic power in the present society. And that's what's driving us in the wrong direction. So I think our challenge is really to say, what can we do to somehow rein in those destructive forces so that love can be expressed morally? Or can we require corporations to include in their corporate charters some environmental and social responsibility, which would be a way of describing love in their terms? So, as long as we have the institutional challenges, we're not able to really bring love to the level where it would make a difference with the catastrophe that we're facing at the moment. Thank you.
I'm first going to react to, I think it was Dirk who used the word extinction in relation to climate change. I'm worked on the subject, but not as a scientist, as a facilitator of negotiations. I'm not convinced by the argument that we're heading potentially to the extension of humanity. Nor do I feel that it is a useful argument, because it's very depressing. It doesn't invite to action if the feeling is we're all going to be wiped out anyway. That's my gut feeling, and I have to react with irritation to kids who glue themselves to painting. If anything, I would, and now I'm picking up what I believe it was, that indeed it is corporations who are at the root of the issue, and the thing can do and should do is to make it profitable for corporations to do the thing climatically and put penalties on them. But that's really a discussion about climate change, and I thought I'd say a few things about love rather than climate change or change. I said my starting point on love is the same, I think, as Peter Bass, Peter Info, love your neighbor as yourself. And that to me is the foundation of justice, of social justice. The problem comes in when one tries to define the neighborhood. It's one thing to love your neighbor across the road who's dumped his electric scooter in your parking place. It's another thing when the neighborhood is global. And we do have to look at things globally. Love also, to me, means peace, peace as opposed to war. And we're all talking about war now as if there were no wars happening before February the 24th, or whenever it was that Russia started its so-called special operation. There happens to be a war going on in Ethiopia, but it doesn't make the headlines. So one has to look very broadly at the issue. So I would put peace footing as love, and looking at this personally, recently I was watching a rather corny war movie, Second World War movie. Lucky I am that I was never called upon to go to the enemy or to be killed by that person because I was his enemy. And I guess there are lots of people who can say it now, perhaps all of us around this table. But I sometimes ask myself, what would I have done had I been told, take this gun and go and shoot? So I think there were some very brave people who in that situation took the line of love. In some cases they were allowed to, in others they were shot. My last comment, these are all very erratic comments, but there's personal thoughts going through my mind. Since I'm thinking about global peace, one immediately goes into geopolitics. And the big powers are, as somebody's mentioned, I believe, US and China. Do we have to choose? Does one have to choose between US and China? Are there alternatives to looking at the world in that way? I think Nitin might have something to say about that. Personally, on the one hand, live in a society like China's, where I'm told what to do and what not to do, and I'm censored. On the other hand, the US continue to do. So I'm sort of worried there as to where to place myself in relation to geopolitics. So I have love and justice, love and peace, love and politics. Lots of questions, no answers. And perhaps I leave it at that and stay with you for a little longer.
When you talked about the extinction, and you talked about this being an ethic of fear as opposed to an ethic of love, I think it's a perfect example. We've been talking about an ethic of fear, ethic of love in some of the writings that I gave you before. And the idea is that an ethic of fear, or using fear, which people are using on the climate change. We're going to all cook, and we're all going to be without water. We're all going to be this and that. That just freezes people in their fear and takes away the desire or the futility. It makes the futility of doing anything pretty clear. Whereas if you can build on an ethic of love, in particular vis-a-vis nature, which to understand, you need so many other ideas that are artistic and humanistic and philosophic to understand nature. There's so many ways of looking at even a tree. And that way you might somehow, it's up to the education system to focus on a broader approach to knowledge about nature so that you can inspire a love for nature, because the fear is going to go nowhere. So I just thank you for bringing that up and using that term, because it's been a hobby course for me. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up a little on what Michael was saying. A couple of things. In some ways, for those of us who have been involved in the climate exercise for many years, I actually see what has happened, what has so far happened in climate as at least the beginnings of a shift in the spirit of the first time. I have actually seen countries willing to do things which they do not require immediately, but which they are doing because of potential effects 40, 50, 100 years from now. Second, there seems to be a certain willingness to accept a certain sense of common but differentiated responsibility. Now, in that sense, this is a useful forward step on the highly gladiatory international system that we had inherited from the past. This is one of the early cases where we are seeing this. We did a lot of this during the 90s in the United Nations. A lot of what we did in the Rio Conference, in the Copenhagen Conference, etc., were attempts at identifying what is it that we share between us that we need to do together. But we never really got action on those things effectively. This is perhaps the first time we are actually going to get seeing the beginnings of an action. Yes, not enough, absolutely true. We need to do far more, but at least we are moving forward in steps. And that I just thought I'd bring. The second point that I wanted to make is something which, since Barbara and Jacques are in France, it's the right place to say this, that our democracy began with this cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And what we have seen since then is that liberty is embedded itself in people's minds, that we are today seeing people more involved in politics than they were, say, 200 years ago or 300 years ago. But equality and fraternity have not embedded themselves that clearly in people's minds. Equality we all know about. But what is most important is fraternity is missing. And that is really what the social summit was about. Promoting fraternity as an important basis. And love is about fraternity. You know, you can't have a relationship with another woman or a man or a family if you only focus on liberty, your liberty. It has to be with the notion of equality and fraternity built in. Exactly as it is in person-to-person relationship, we need the same notion of equality and fraternity built in much more into the way countries relate to one another, within country, how people relate to one another. And that to me is what is the message of this simple the notion of love as the basis of politics. It means getting equality and fraternity as firmly established in people's minds as liberty is today. I just thought I would bring this dimension in because in many ways, this is what the social summit was about. And I must thank Jacques for the note that he has sent on the proposals for the social summit in 2025. And if we can work to the 2025 social summit and try and focus on getting equality and fraternity as firmly established in the sphere of politics as liberty is, then I think we will be getting closer to the idea of bringing love into politics. Let me stop here.
Well, since my thesis that we're facing extinction has, I think, been criticized because it is too much negative and not enough positive. But I think it's also important to get the head out of the sand and see what's going on. I think that where love comes in is that I think most of us here and most of the people on this globe love the planet Earth as our home, as a place to live in, that we can survive and relate to others and express our love and so forth and so on. The question is, are we going to do anything to ensure that its continuation? And it's really that serious. I mean, this is not just a minor little quibble. This is really important. So I say that there is potentially a huge amount of love. I think when people really realize that this may all go, you know, that it isn't one of fear, because you won't be here to witness it. So you can't be afraid of something that you can't see or hear. But what we can do is mobilize the love, potential love. And I think to mobilize that love, I think you need that other element, which is power. Now, I do think that there is some, you know, there has been some substantial changes going on. I think that the Glasgow conference that took place last year was an important moment in the sense that it was a lot of people who attended that were, you know, out of the business community and so forth, and people who, you know what power is about. And I think those people, we've got to get those bases of power mobilized and so forth to overcome the political obstacles, because I think so many of the obstacles are just political. We've got to be able to counter those political obstacles that exist and get this whole process on track. Now, I think there is progress. I think there is movement. And I think there's some people who are in that thing. You know, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working very hard to try to get real experts in this area to speak to groups on what the potential exists in various kinds of alternatives and so forth and so on. We've got to understand what can be done, and we've got to get the power behind it to do it, and not bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, we'll be okay, we'll muddle through, you know, we'll get it going. That isn't going to work. So, all right, that's my contribution.
I'll be very brief. First of all, I thank Nitin for his remarks on the issues of which relate to the question of collaboration at the international level, because I do believe that we need to address the issue of what collaborative structures can we imagine are the ones we have at the moment sufficient in terms of the challenges we face, whether we see it in the most dramatic or less dramatic sort of perspective. And I think also it's cannot also be separated from the question of economic and social development, which is why also the perspective of a new social summit. And in this context, I like to thank Jacques, as Nitin does, for his very comprehensive piece that he circulated to us. I hope we can continue discussion on the basis of that in the time to come. But we can also not separate these things from economic development, economic and social development. And we see a very skewed sort of development in that regard all over the world. Finally, I like to say that there's an issue also of responsibility. How do we somehow cope with the concept of a responsibility, both at the individual level and also at the broader level of societies and ultimately at the global level? Thank you.
I want to come back here to our understanding of love. And I was given my training as in theology. I turned to one of our major theological minds of the last century, Paul Tillich.
Paul
Tillich, who has written a book on love, power, and justice. And his basic understanding of love is that it represents the urge, the drive to unite what is separated. And I think this links up with what was said before, and also links up with the quotes from Martin Luther King that Barbara circulated, that power without love is reckless and love without power is sentimental. I think that love, therefore, is more than a strong sentiment. It rather is the manifestation of the power and dynamic in life seeking fulfillment by overcoming vulnerability, exclusion, and separation. Now, this contrasts with a widespread feeling that our life is basically a struggle for survival, a struggle in which the fittest wins. That is the popularized version of Darwinist approach. And that power is basically the energy to survive in this constant struggle for life. Power means to impose one's will, even against resistance. This is the classical definition of power by Max Weber. And we follow largely this understanding of power as imposing one's will in a situation of conflicting interests, of struggle against resistance. Now, to introduce love into power, which is what Barbara put into the topic for this third session, the unifying power of love in politics, to introduce love into the politics of power means to change, in particular, the understanding of power. I turn here back to what I learned from Hannah Arendt in her Human Condition, in which she talks about power not over, power against, but power with. Power as the capacity to act together. Power that accepts its legitimacy from the collective will to achieve. And if one introduces this element into the understanding of power, then to link up power, to link up love and power means a strong criticism of this so-called realist understanding of power in politics, which accepts struggle, which accepts competition and resistance as given with the nature of human community, and seeks to establish law and order. But it is constantly in danger of becoming reckless, as Martin Luther King has put it. Now, introducing love into politics challenges the claims of realism of this classical understanding of the role of power in politics. It challenges the assumption that establishing a viable order presupposes to impose one's will and to seek obedience as a response. Instead of trusting the productive capacity of competition, love and power seeks to enlarge the scope of cooperation. Instead of imposing one's will or interest against resistance, it will listen to the adversary and seek in communication to understand his interest. Instead of establishing power by drawing lines of demarcation, it will follow a practice of inclusiveness. Instead of accepting that the defense of order may create or deepen enmity, it will seek reconciliation, even at the cost of appearing weak. So this is introducing love into the exercise of power means a total reversal of the widespread understanding of what power is in politics. Now, this will appear in the eyes of many as rather blue-eyed or unrealistic. This is not how power and politics operate. And this has been one of the concerns of Reinhold Niebuhr, one of the great ethics teachers of this past generation, who was concerned about the role of love in power and politics. And his understanding has been that the actualization, the institutionalization, the working out of love in social context happens in the form of justice. That justice is the actualized manifestation of love in society. But that seems to take us back to the situation of struggle that needs to be handled in terms of establishing justice, establishing law and order. My understanding is that introducing love into politics not only changes the understanding of what power means and how power is being exercised, but it also changes our understanding of justice. Justice not as retributive justice, but justice as transformative justice. Now, this may be sufficient as the quick impulse. I think that there is a great potential in introducing the dimension of love as the urge to unify what is separated into our understanding and practice of politics, both in changing and qualifying our understanding and practice of power as well as of justice. Thank you.
Thank you.
My title is Selfless Love with Nature. And firstly, human interdependence with nature. Imamichi, my professor, indicated humans are creating various machines that have structure totally inconceivable in nature and are trying to bring nature under their complete control. Human beings not only occupy the dominant position in nature, but are also overpowering it and interposing machinery between nature and themselves. We try to conquer nature by machines, but it is impossible. Through machinery, dehumanization through detemporalization occurred. On the contrary, nature is something that awaits maturation. Wait for the time to be ripe. Technology is nothing about or always in motion, while nature is waiting. Nature is, according to Imamichi, the teacher of waiting and enduring. It is not enough to look at nature objectively by looking after nature because human beings are in essence a part of nature. So by making our inner selves truly calm, the meaning of waiting can be understood. Stressing temporality means emulating nature's waiting stance. This fosters the patience to wait the unfolding of time, Zeitigen, as well as an awareness of waiting. The next one, the second one point, the transcendence of beauty by penetrating into the life itself of objects. Artistic activities, both in creation and in appreciation, are founded on and at the same time according to the time process. And the essence of human being is temporality. The artistic activities can recover from dehumanization. The new virtue, waiting and enduring, will be realized by art. The aim of artistic activities is the beauty. Beauty is idea of coincidence of beauty and goodness like Platon, the transcendence of ousia. This practical realization is according to Basho. Let's learn from pine tree on pine tree and from bamboo on bamboo. Daisetsu Suzuki wrote, draw bamboos for 10 years, become a bamboo, then forget all about bamboos when you are drawing, in possession of an infallible technique. The individual places himself at the mercy of inspiration. Suzuki Daisetsu said that. To become a bamboo and to forget that you are one with it while drawing. This is a den of bamboo. This is a moving with the rhythmic movement of the spirit, which resides in the bamboo as well as in artist himself. Suzuki said it is a statement of intuition or perception. It is penetrating into the life itself of objects. It is a realization of coincidence between transcendence and rhizomes at one time by intuition. The third, love with nature and trust nature. I'd like to introduce ceramic, Japanese ceramic, like Jikinu, their fifth like Kichiemon, the famous representative ceramist in Japan, and what he said on art of ceramic. He strongly pointed out the depth of sense of value to the world. He uses his family's clay, which was made and kept for 100 years, 3 generations before his grandfather by his family traditional way, and now he is mixing up and bringing up for next 100 years after. His family always thinks and practices for next and next generations. He clearly said that he makes and creates clay for 3 generations. He burned teacup clay, individual one by one, by fire and uses bellows for making a whirlpool of an air current. It means he asks for help of natural phenomena. On the teacup, we can find red and green colors separately and together. It occurs by quantity of glaze, by chemical changes. Its lead is from the sufficient oxygen. On the contrary, green by less oxygen. He said he put teacup into chaos. The coexistence of red and green means an impossibility of assumptions. What happened? He said that he must entrust everything to nature. He said teacup comes from powers of nature, and finally, consciousness and unconsciousness, the artificial and the nature, the necessity and the accidental, if possible, combine each other. A teacup will be succeeded. Human beings must make harmony with nature. From the side of human beings, we must recognize the slogan, to be satisfied with what we have. We must untrust nature, not conquer. We must borrow the powers of nature. The third is a suggestion from Yamamba, is a no place. In no place, the serious and important works are concerning the stories of aged women. Ba means aged lady, and Yama means mountain. In the depths of mountain, Yamamba, mountain crone, lives and asks to traveler who loses his or her way in the mountain to stay one night in her hermit's cell. We believe Yamamba is a ghost or a monster. In no play, Yamamba, a young dancer, plays good with dancing kusemai very well. She decided to go to Buddhistic temple, Zenkoji, with her trainer and servant. On the way in deep bosoms of mountain, they lost their way and must walk with bare foot. Suddenly, the darkness comes down around them. An aged lady, in fact, mountain crone, appears and says, "Please stay one night in my hermit's cell." They accept her proposal. In old days, she was a famous dancer and specialist of song and dance, kusemai. She said about herself, "A mountain crone is a woman who helps people. However, lowly women cannot see me, and people recognize me as an evil spirit. The sound splitting in their gorge becomes an echo traveling over the top of trees. And let's sing. It will bring you an opportunity to the silent voice, which you can listen in your enlightened heart." She said, "I will come again and do my song and dance in the light of moon." She appears and does song and dance, kusemai, beautifully in the moonlight. And the Yamamba says, "I have waited so long for this wonderful occasion. I will show you my true form." She says the principles of Buddhism like this. I appear as a female orc However, when we think that lightness and longness possesses the same nature, just as the ability of shikisokuzeku exists because of Buddha's law. Paired concepts like willows are green and flowers are red are all empty. Her expression is similar as what poem says. I lament this transient, sorrowful world. My transient self is like the empty shell of a cicada on my slave. And she disappeared. We, audience of the no play, believe Mountain Clone is going to heaven. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks actually to one of the papers that Max has written. I came across a quote from Michael Kirby, who was a judge on the Australian Supreme Court, I think. And he was somebody who was very active on human rights issues. And he said in an interview in 2003, if you ask what the essence of human rights is, I think it's love, that you can love another person, even a person who's done very wrong things, because you realize you share with them the phenomenon of the common existence of our species. It's, I suppose, the golden rule, love one another. And I think that is the foundation of universal human rights. I'll send that quote in, but I think it's actually very, very powerful. And in the struggle that we, who activists in the human rights world have been engaged in for the last many years, is the struggle to reclaim human rights, because they have been so, at the beginning, well, certainly when I became involved, which was in the mid-70s, the task was to legitimize human rights. And we were engaged in that task for several years, and I think we made a lot of headway. I, at that time, was working for Amnesty International, and helping, well, I was setting up an office at the UN in New York, but we were working very closely with the churches, both the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. We were working with trade unions from all political persuasions, and with jurists and so on. So we had an extraordinary force and network working for the legitimization of the values of human rights and so on and so forth. And then the more legitimacy human rights gained, the more, of course, they became contested. And of course, they were contested during the Cold War in a very clear way. So civil and political rights and the rights of the individual were forcefully pitted against economic, social, and cultural rights and the rights of the collective. So that was a continual struggle, which had occurred as part of the Cold War. Then when the Cold War ended in the very early 1990s, human rights, then primarily by Western governments and institutions such as the EU, linked human rights directly with free market economies, with neoliberalism, if you like. Another trend that began was that the universality of human rights, as codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and then subsequent treaties, began to be more and more challenged by governments, particularly those governments that were, in fact, violating human rights. There was a big push at the World Conference on Human Rights in 1993, primarily by governments in Asia. And they basically challenged the universality of human rights as understood in the Universal Declaration and so on, as representing only Western values, not their own values, and serving neo-colonial and neo-imperial interests. And then at another level, you saw multitudes of claims being made on human rights because everybody wanted their concern to be proclaimed as human rights. So that human rights, as they had evolved with great care, with a lot of thought, on the basis of agreed values, began to risk and did risk losing meaning and what should be special to them. So for me, the question is, I mean, how I do believe that what we've been talking about, bringing love and power together, is a very crucial way to move forward. And the question for me is how. I found, for example, Conrad, what you were saying about love and power very persuasive, and I wondered whether there were any politicians, active politicians in Germany, for example, who are reflecting your thoughts, because certainly in my country, I think we have a dearth of leadership particularly in the opposition political parties. I mean, our ruling party at the moment is catastrophic, and I'm not going to go into that. Then I think we have to understand how ruthless the right is in pursuing its agenda of politics and fear. And how much, I mean, I was reading an article about Netanyahu, who, as you know, has just come to power in Israel, and how he's very much prepared the ground, deploying a strategy of examining through focus groups, through different surveys, what most aroused fear and hatred in people. And then on the basis of that, developing campaigns and simplified slogans to get that agenda through. Ruthlessly, but very, very effectively. And so I wonder, do we need to take a leaf out of their book? Do we need to take a leaf out of their book? I don't suggest that we be ruthless, etc., etc. But I do think we need to think about how we can get this across, what is needed, what forces we need to get together to bring the point across. I think I'll stop there. And I would also like to say that, you know, not all is so bleak. I mean, here, because we have such a catastrophic situation, and because especially in recent times, the Conservative Party has taken the gloves off. That has taken their gloves off. That is, they're very clear about what it is that they want to achieve, and they're very clear that they don't actually care about the large majority of the population. So we're living in a situation here where the majority of citizens are not in agreement with government policy, but the response of the government is to simply ignore that. And in fact is bringing in laws to counter protest, to counter freedom of expression, to counter demonstrations, to criminalize these activities. So we're in a very dire strait, but people are now much more informed. Protest is much more widespread. Linkages are being made between environmental activists, human rights activists, etc., etc. And there's a very clear understanding that justice and the environment and nature and the planet are part of a single whole. I think in a way that has never been so before. But we've had to have this sort of very a critical time, I think, as a wake-up call. And then I would say that I went to a film earlier this week, and I don't know, Nitin, if you've seen it. It was a wonderful film called All That Breathes, which is about two brothers in Delhi from a Muslim background who have devoted their lives to saving kites, to saving birds. And this film links all the different levels that we are talking about. So I do recommend, if it comes to your neighborhood, please to see it. But it's an example for me of the interconnectedness of everything. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Margot.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to add to Konrad's intervention a very short sentence which we found in the women's movement already, I don't know, 30 years ago. This was after the decade, not after the decade, but in the beginning of the decade, Churches in Solidarity with Women. And we had a conference in Sheffield at the time, and we found the sentence, "Power is like love. The more we how do you say, wir teilen, Konrad, was heißt teilen? Oh. Share it. The more we share it, the greater it grows, the bigger it grows." It is, and I still think that it's a very good sentence. Power is like love. The more we share it, the bigger it grows. But of course, it very often the official politics went in another direction. I see that. But I must say, thank you, Margot, very much for your intervention, and also speaking about the present British government, British government. We in Germany, we are now governed by a group of different parties, but I must say that the participation of people, of us as citizens, is a lot encouraged by our government, which is a good thing. For instance, I just give a very short example. We have now in our Ministry for Economy, the state secretary is a man who was Sven Giegold. He was before deputy in the European Parliament, and he created a platform, Europe Calling. And this platform was shared by 3,000 or 4,000 people. And these were webinars, but also discussions, and very intense discussions where everyone was invited to share their opinions and to find a common opinion to get all together, or to find a way for certain conflicts. I cannot go into details now. And he is now in a very important position in the Ministry of Economy, and he is still sharing his views with all these people, with these 4,000 people. I mean, imagine which minister does that. This is, and this for me is really an encouragement. And I also wanted to thank Nitin Desai for your positive view on the development, that you say there are changes. And I think there are changes. We are not locked. We find a lot of commitment, of engagement, at least on the level of the civil society. At least I can speak only for my country, of course, because I don't know enough about the other countries. But it is, I must say, it is quite encouraging. And we shouldn't think that the little things we can do as private people are not important, even if we don't have power in the normal understanding of this word. I mean, we cannot, what Konrad said, the definition of power is to impose your will. No, we can't do that, but we can share and we can cooperate. And this creates really many changes. We see it in our simple neighborhood. People are all of a sudden changing their minds, and they are starting to try to change their lifestyles and not to use their cars anymore so much, or to how shall I say? I can't find the words in English too quickly. But anyhow, and I think we should encourage these changes and not be too pessimistic. I think well, even although I must say that the beginning of the war in February this year has also had a big influence of the changement of the minds, because all of a sudden we realize that this war has a big input on our own life, on our own energy, or scarcity of the energy, and that all of a sudden that led to the change of habitudes, and people now all of a sudden try to economize gas and oil and electricity, which they didn't do before. So, I mean, sometimes a horrible event is also changing the minds. I mean, they are both. Both is true. Both is true. Love, on the one hand, and also, how shall I say, the negative power on the other hand. I mean, I don't know, maybe I cannot make myself understood clearly enough. But anyhow, I wanted to encourage us not to lose courage and not to be too pessimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
We are in the United States, as you may or may not know, about to have the midterm elections on Tuesday, which are looking rather bleak right now. We have a very well-organized right wing and far right wing in the United States right now. And they've made a lot of strides both at local and state levels and national levels, making changes nationally, thanks to the Supreme Court becoming very conservative. So it's a little terrifying. And we will see what happens on Tuesday, but it's a little terrifying. Looking at possibly regressing back to the Republicans being in control of the country. So my not a positive comment regarding that. I agree with what Elizabeth said about people at the local levels trying to continue to, live in a positive way and make changes, but certainly that varies around the world. And I do hope for people, but I am concerned about the United States, particularly potential to have negative influence on things like the environment and the war as well. I'm concerned that they will no longer support the war.
And they won't be supporting the poor as well.
Mhm.
That's
Yes, that too.
that's socially it's going to be difficult.
And the poor have grown tremendously, as have the rich during these years. The gap has grown tremendously. So we're seeing a huge spike in homelessness, et cetera, which I know many countries are seeing, but the US is seeing a marked change in that, in economic, what do I want to say? The spread of economic wealth and poverty. The middle class is smaller, much smaller. So you see people, buying Twitter and crazy things like that because they're so wealthy.
Yeah, the other thing that really concerns me is it's what the Republican Party is representing now is an antithesis to love and politics. The antithesis of love and politics.
Yes.
In every respect, and I think that's to be feared.
And very much against women. That's difficult.
But why do the women lap them up? The women are voting for them.
I've always been really puzzled by that forever, why women, given the fact that they represent 51% of the world, seem to lack power or do not advocate for themselves more than they do. In the United States, the most recent readings I've done kind of indicate that women have bought into this Republican story about traditionalism and, the sort of 1950s view of women being protected and being able to stay in the home with their children and blah, 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 sort of a little idealistic tale, particularly Southern women. And there's a lot more Republicans in the Southern United States seem to be voting in that direction, but it is very hard to understand since it's kind of self-defeating. Yes.
I'm going to ask Jacques to give his 10 cents.
Thank you. I came here thinking that I have to speak in English because I will be unable in French to talk about amour et politique. Et derrière behind this comment, there is the kind of traditional reticence in part of the Western culture to use what is called big words. So substitutes have been found, and Nikki mentioned again the liberté, égalité, fraternité, and there are other substitutes like solidarity. But now, after the discussion this morning, I am totally convinced that indeed we should put love in national and international politics. Now, with a number of wonderful precision we have made or recalled. I will start with Norbert. Indeed, love is action, and in that sense, he's completely right that the word aimer is a critical one, because love in abstraction is nothing. But so that was to me very important to this comment of Norbert that love is action. Another one, which is also very that which is coming from Gandhi, that to change the world, we have to change ourselves. It's everything is connected. I mean, that's also, I think, critical to use this concept of love properly. At the international level and at all level, we are, I mean, I keep coming back to this point that we have to realize that we are in exceptional circumstances. Some people may criticize the word danger of extinction, but we are in a situation like that. So in such a situation, there is really a need for changing the language and the philosophy. So to introduce love with power is a step in the right direction. Now, just a few. How do you apply love to, let's say, to the ideas and the, I will not say the philosophy, but which are represented by the Trump and Bolsonaro of this world? Now, what is the proper attitude to have? As you know, I have been very much influenced by Laudato Si. So the Pope, when he talked about love and the necessity he also talked about first a cultural revolution, which means a change, fundamental change in the way we think and operate. And he talked about necessity, he doesn't use the word punishment, but of justice and I don't find the right word in English, but those who are criminal, in fact, right, and criminal vis-a-vis the whole world have to be judged, have to be sentenced. To me, the things like the criminal court, right, are extremely important, and because the danger is that with putting too much emphasis on love, which will be understood as everything goes, and tolerance as everything is possible. We are in a situation where a third of the world and is victim of lies, and where important leaders use lie as a strategy. So that's yeah, that's the first point I wanted to make. And on the link between what we think, what we do, and what is happening in the world, that's how I understand the noosphere, that everything we think and we do contribute to this sort of spiritual and intellectual, I don't know what word you use, sphere, which is in fact determining also what happened in the world. So yeah. Now, forgive me because it's I had prepared something, but in the light of what we have discussed, I think I may even well, let's. I think it's impossible to be too timid I mean, I'm focusing again on the international level, but the type of cooperation, the reason for cooperate have to be also re-examined. I mean, we continue to use the word development, which is totally ambiguous given what we know on the effect of nature and so on. I think we will agree that sustainable development has not really changed anything. I mean, it certainly has not changed the ranking of country according to the traditional power, military power, economic power. So this report of the Secretary General that some of you made allusion to, that I just comment, he says we have to redefine human progress. So that goes very far, and it starts with the language, and so the reason to cooperate, right, and have to be much more different of what they were. I mean, in the past, as there was the idea of distinction between develop and developing, and the idea that those who had colonized should compensate and so on. And there was an idea also that it was in the mutual interest of the poor and the rich country to cooperate. Now it's more. It's a question again of survival. So of mankind. So the basis and which underlies the cooperation, I think, have to be enriched.
How do we take this agenda forward besides talking with each other? This is one question we should ask. It's not enough for us to talk to each other about these things. What can we do to move this agenda forward? If I look at the past 30 years, then I would say at this stage to try and work within our domestic political systems is of very limited value, because our domestic political systems are getting very divided. And what we're seeing in the United States is just not just unique to the United States, it's happening in other countries. But there are a couple of some other things that have happened. And one thing that has happened over the past 30 years is the growing strength of global civil society. Today, if I do a lot of work on climate change in my country, and I do not rely on the official sources of information. I get most of my information from what is put out by fairly well-organized and honest global NGO networks, like Climate Action Network and others that I'm just mentioning about. So I'd say that today, if we want to push this agenda forward, at this point, the best way of putting this agenda forward is by making it a more and more active instrument in the discussions of global civil society. Because the global civil society is moving with how the world, the ecology of the world and the economy of the world is developing, governments are not. So I just wanted to leave you with this thought that besides talking with each other, the way to move this forward is to see how we can get it into the agenda of the youngsters who are running the global civil society. We are all old people, and most of us are at least. And we should now start seeing how we can engage them in the same way that they're engaged today in climate. Can we engage them in this notion of a world where equality and fraternity is as important as liberty? So let me just leave you with this thought.
Yes.
I just wanted to say something in response to what Jacques was saying about different language, different ways of finding different ways of cooperating. And Zaid, who was the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, at a talk about hope in 2021, called for the need for different ways and language. And he pointed to the fact that the UN's vocabulary amounts to something like 20,000 words, which he felt trapped us in a very narrow lexicon of language, which traps us in thought. And I do think that that's the case. I mean, certainly when I was working for the UN, I felt very constricted in terms of the language, the limitations of the language. And so I think that that is actually a very big challenge. And also I agree, I mean, the perversity with which language is used both within the UN and outside the UN is something that needs to be challenged. So I feel that Triglav does have a role, an important role in making some of these issues clear. And perhaps from this meeting, a very short report could be produced, which would be also looking to 2025 and how we could influence that agenda. Just some thought.
Thank you. We used to contribute to different movements in the UN. In particular, we did it with the Rio Plus 20. Okay.
Just two things. If you have some time, I just read a book called The Ministry of the Future. It's a novel by King Stanley Robinson, and it's an interesting approach on how to tackle climate change and what eventually people getting together did to tackle this problem we're facing. But only if you have some time. And last, regarding the election in the US, I mean, one of my real fear is about just democracy. When you have 300 candidates, far right candidates who've already stated that they would absolutely not recognize the result of the election in case they're losing, which means that actually there's a group of elected people through a democratic process which have already denied the democratic process, saying if we're losing, that the elections are rigged. It's really something, I mean, we should look at very carefully for our country. That was all.
Est-ce que je peux parler?
Oui.
Oui. Je pense que au-delà de la religion, plus loin que la nationalité, la politique, quelle que soit l'opinion, nous sommes tous dans la création, la même création. Et la seule chose qui nous unit les uns aux autres, c'est l'amour. L'amour n'a pas de frontières. L'amour est international, mais l'amour, c'est aussi chacun son amour à soi pour pouvoir aimer les autres. Voilà, merci.
Merci beaucoup, Norbert.
Just 3 points. As much as I agree that it's encouraging to see this development in international civil society, which has sort of been much more empowered than in the past, I still believe we also need to look into how can we make official collaborative frameworks work better. We need a UN more than ever, actually, and we see a demise of some of the institutions, which is very, I think, problematic. So we need to tackle it that way as well. Even also institutions like Jacques referred to, like the International Criminal Court, for example, and its status. Furthermore, I think it would be very good to see if we can use the 2025 conference as to renew some of the commitments that were made earlier on in the social summit, as it was. And what Jacques has provided in terms of a text is a very good point of departure to my mind, which it would be very good to discuss in the future. But finally, also, I believe we need to look into the fact that the inequality in the world is not declining, it's actually increasing dramatically. It goes for the national level, but it also goes for the international level. We see it in these accumulation of enormous riches that somehow begin to determine things on the governance level. And thank you very much for convening us today.
Thank you for coming. Dirk.
Yeah, yeah, I took Vega. Yeah, I would make 2 points. First is I think we need to focus. I think the climate change issue is the primordial issue of the day, and we need to focus on it. Number 2, I don't think we should do this primarily through our political process because it doesn't work. I think that we need to think particularly in terms of non-governmental ways of dealing with this. I think this has already happened in Glasgow, where there was a substantial participation by the business community. Some of the universities are making major strides. Stanford, for instance, has got a whole school now, which has been funded by the private sector to a large extent to work on climate change issues. This is taking what is already known, the technologies that are available, the people who know what's going on, and trying to get that into a more active, actionable type of framework. And I think that's the way we're going to have to go, because I don't see it happening through our governments at this point.
I'm going to Jacques.
Yes, I cannot leave the last word to the on that. Nothing is possible without government. Nothing will happen without the cooperation of government to change the situation. Nothing.
Well, okay, but nothing will do anything unless there's love in the in the noosphere. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And we'll continue and look at doing a meeting on the conference in 2025, if that interests you, and if you want to continue this discussion too on the issue of love.